Thank you very much for joining us for this live broadcast tonight to this special live edition, Awareness and Action Domestic Violence, as we broadcast live for you from the David Moss Automotive Group Performance Center here tonight. We've got a great group of panelists, and we hope at the end of this hour we're going to be able to answer a lot of questions that you may have about domestic violence. And we're going to get to one of the important topics is how domestic violence affects all of us, even if you don't think that it does, or even if you're not aware that it does. Let me introduce our panelists here tonight. Former Chief Judge Belvin Perry. As you recall, he presided over the Casey Anthony trial, and he is a Channel 9 Eyewitness News legal analyst. For Florida's Ninth Circuit Court State Attorney Jeff Ashton, who prosecuted the Casey Anthony trial. Sherri DeWitt, founder of DeWitt Law Firm and News 96.5's legal analyst. Carol Wick is the CEO for Harbor House. And Michelle Dwyer is a childhood victim of domestic violence. And we are once again coming to you live tonight. It's Awareness and Action, Domestic Violence.
Those phone calls are what the ex-boyfriend made, terrorizing dispatchers, telling them that if they didn't follow his commands, and he was going to do a certain thing. And at one point, he even put a crying Elizabeth Hamilton on the phone.
I am a gentleman from Lakeland. I have kidnapped my ex-fiancée. If he continues to follow me, I will kill her.
I have been kidnapped and we are being followed. He's threatening to kill me if they keep following him.
You know, so many times when we hear these reports on the radio and see them on Channel 9, we think to ourselves, well, that's somebody else's issue. And Nancy, as we've learned, I mean, it's really not.
No, I've done countless stories at Channel 9 and so have my coworkers where we've seen these domestic violence cases spill out into public places, grocery stores, hair salons, parks. So this is really everyone's problem. We have a really impressive panel here to talk about this issue in Central Florida, but I want to start with Michelle Dwyer, who's sitting here next to me. An impressive group here, but you impress me the most because you are a survivor. So can you take us inside one of these relationships and talk to us about what it feels like to be there and be trapped?
Okay, well, I was in a domestic violence situation or relationship since the age of 16. And right after high school, I got married. It felt okay in the beginning, but I realized that he was keeping me isolated, for I couldn't have any friends where they can realize what was going on around me. Terrible situation. Didn't know about any type of resources or the help that was there.
Carol Wick with Harbor House is here. I heard the word isolation. All too often, that's how it starts.
Absolutely, and the isolation is really subtle. A lot of times we hear, especially here in Orlando, we hear a lot of our survivors in the shelters say they thought they came here to start over, to start fresh, thought this was going to be a new beginning for their relationship. And then what it really was an attempt to isolate them from their support system back home, wherever that might be. And it usually begins very early on in a relationship to try to keep that person from the support network that would tell them, hey, there's something wrong with that relationship.
Can you talk a little bit about what domestic violence is really? Because we think we know what it is. We think it's, oh, he hit me, or oh, she hit me. But it's more than that.
Well, we actually use the term domestic abuse because domestic violence is the Florida statute, and what we deal with is much more insidious than just what the Florida statute recognizes. We look at the economic abuse, controlling the money, not letting someone have access to that or even destroying their credit, in addition to just the emotional abuse and the degradation that happens. I was actually talking to a survivor just about an hour ago who said, you know, my mind is all messed up. I just don't even know what's happening anymore. And when he says one thing, I know it's not right in my gut, but my head tells me it is, and I don't know which way to go.
You know, you talked about and Nancy, I picked up on the same word, isolation. It's just certainly that's a sign you got to look for with a domestic partner is if that person starts to isolate you. Are there other signs that you want to watch for?
You know, I always tell people early on in a relationship, the easiest way to tell whether or not you've got someone who's going to have abusive tendencies is whether or not they listen to the word no and they respect your boundaries. So if you say you want to go out with your friends and you don't want to have an evening with them, will they respect that? Or will they continue to text you, want to know where you are, want to know who you're with? Will they show up where you're at? Will they respect that boundary? Whatever that boundary or limit is, if you say you want to go to your place of worship and they say they want you to go out and do something different, the attempted isolation may not be no, you can't go, but it might be something as well, hey, I got that front way tickets to that band you want to see. So of course you don't want to go with your friends, you want to come out with me. So it doesn't necessarily look like isolation, and I think that's one of the really tricky things about these abusive relationships.
Carol, if you suspect that someone you know might be a victim, what can you do?
I think it's really important that you don't stand back and do nothing. A lot of people think, well, it's not my problem, it's not my business, they don't want me involved. But the best thing you can do is to talk to that person, tell them that you're worried about them and you're concerned about the signs that you're seeing. The most important thing I think you can do is to connect them with a domestic violence advocate who can actually go through an assessment with them, talk to them about some of the warning signs that may be in their relationship, the power and control wheel, but also the lethality assessment that looks at how dangerous the situation is, and then can do a safety plan with that person.
You know, there are times in which someone who's a domestic abuse victim will deny that they are a victim of domestic abuse until it gets so deep into it that there's no choice but denying it. I mean, sometimes, and police officers see it all the time when they go on domestic violence calls, that a wife or girlfriend who, say, has been abused will suddenly defend that man when they're putting the handcuffs on him.
Well, and it's actually one of the reasons that it's so difficult to prosecute these cases, because survivors will often either recant, say, well, no, it didn't really happen, you misunderstood, or I don't want to participate in prosecution, or you're wrong, it's not really what's going on. There's a lot of shame involved, and one of the things that abusers are really good at is convincing the person they're in a relationship with that it's 100% their fault, and that they caused that abuse to happen. And so when someone else finds out about it, there's a lot of shame about that as well. It's very, very difficult to really recognize when you're in that relationship, because you want to protect that image that things are going okay.
You're listening live to News 96.5 now. You can also watch us live on the stream as well at news965.com. It's 7:15. You can text us your questions as well. If you have a question for anybody on our panel, you can text us at the number 21232. And we're here with this great panel, including Harbor House of Central Florida. And for anybody who's just tuning in, or maybe they're tuning in to get information about domestic violence, what does Harbor House do for domestic abuse victims?
We have a whole variety of services available for survivors, everything from an emergency shelter to rapid rehousing to get you back into homes, a new home. We can get you home to your family if you've been brought here by your abuser and isolated. But we also have legal advocacy in the criminal system, in the civil system, and also in the dependency system. We have advocates working in law enforcement, people who will come out to the hospital and see you out to your workplace and help you get a safe workplace. We also work with children as young as age 4 and teach them how to intervene when they see abusive relationships. And our Leaders of Courage program is incredibly successful. Our recent research shows that 95% of the kids who go through that 8-week program actually have intervened and helped a friend get out of an abusive relationship.
State Attorney Jeff Ashton is with us as well, and we thank you for being here. Carol just listed the variety of ways that Harbor House is there for survivors, for victims. I know I've done many stories where these survivors have told me, yes, Harbor House was there for me. The system is not. The system is broken. The courthouse can't do anything for me. I know that you've worked extensively on this. Talk to me a little bit about the biggest challenges that your office faces when it comes to prosecuting these cases, and what you need the most.
Well, the biggest challenge is that this crime, almost in the vast majority of cases, happens in private. Mm-hmm. So you have proof problems automatic from that. You know, the other difficulty is that more than any other crime we see, victim cooperation is always a problem. Typically, because of the kind of relationship it is, you have a victim that if they summoned up the courage in the moment to call the police or to get help, that courage is hard to maintain for the weeks and months it takes to get a case before a trial court. One of the things that we've tried to do is create better coordination between the civil court, which has the ability to issue injunctions to prevent domestic violence, and the criminal court. And that's one of the things I think we've been able to do pretty successfully the last few months, is to use the support of the civil court in injunctions. Basically, an injunction, basically a woman can come forward who's been abused, come to the civil court and say, I want an order from the court to keep this man away from me, to have them not contact me. And those are a wonderful vehicle, but they have to be enforced. And one of the things we've begun to do is to actually assign a prosecutor in the civil court to help with the enforcement of those injunctions. But the difficulty is that even if you keep the abuser away, the abuser has friends, the abuser has family. And so it is very difficult. It takes a huge amount of courage for a victim to carry through. And ultimately, the victim is usually the only witness that we have. And if that person recants their testimony, in other words, says, no, what I told the police was not true, or refuses to cooperate, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to prosecute a case like that. Once in a while, you have a good Samaritan or a friend or family member that witnesses something that comes forward, and those people are usually pretty stalwart, and they'll stay with it. If you're lucky, you have a good investigation with physical evidence, photographs, things of that sort, where, believe it or not, we're still working with law enforcement to say you've got to take photographs if you see injuries. But even in the cases that we do get all that together finally and give to a jury, the likelihood of conviction is still pretty low, just because you're talking about a relationship, and inherent in that relationship to most regular people is there's two sides to every story, and there's always another side. And so they're very, very difficult to prosecute. And in fact, the people that we have doing that generally can only do it for 6 to 9 months because they get burned out. It just becomes very, very disheartening to continue to try to get these cases done with so little success. So we're constantly giving them moral support when they try cases, and but usually in 6 to 9 months they're sort of like, man, this is just killing me. Wow. I got to get out and do something else. And then we have other people come in that are enthusiastic and want to do it.
Attorney Ashton, give us your perspective on, in recent months, there have been a couple of high-profile cases. I think of the Rolling Stone magazine article as one, in which there were accusations that were made that then later may or may not have been true. Tell me what that does with regards to real victims coming forward, or the fear that they would have coming forward because of the high-profile nature in some of these cases.
Well, I would hope that, it's unfortunate that high-profile cases get mistaken for the average case, and that happens everywhere. I would hope that victims would not be dissuaded by those kind of cases. But the reality of it is part of our job is to take a case without preconceptions. When we get a case in, our job is to look at that without prejudging who the victim and who the defendant are, to look at the facts, to look at what we can, not only what we believe, but what we can prove. I mean, there are cases we look at where we just don't believe the crime happened. There are cases we look at where we may say, yeah, I believe the crime happened, but I know I don't have enough evidence to prove it. And unfortunately, the evidence code is written in such a way that it's difficult, even if a witness gives a good statement to law enforcement at the scene, if that witness recants, in other words, changes that testimony, you're pretty much dead in the water because of the way the evidence code is written and the limitations on using those statements.
Judge Perry, you can probably speak to how far we've come, because you have spent so many years in our court system here. I don't think we are at that point any longer where victims are showing up at the courthouse lost and alone. I know that the courts have worked with Harbor House to put advocates in place. Can you talk about how key it is that an advocate gets to a victim quickly and is with that victim every step of the way, and how that is in place now?
Carol hit the nail on the head when we talked about victims feel isolated. One of the things that happens now is when they come to the courthouse to get an injunction, they're going to see a Harbor House counselor that's going to be there to work with them and to walk them through the process. But one of the things that I want to back up to is when we first started doing this, we used to have judges that would rotate because of the burnout factor. But one of the things we found out on our side, everyone did not put the same time and effort and had the same training. Judge Alice Blackwell was one of those individuals that stayed in my ear about this whole issue. And one of the things that we were able to do was we created judges that only did domestic violence. The second thing we did, we got with the county, not only to get case managers to work with these cases, but we redesigned courtrooms so that victims would not be sitting in the same waiting area, the same giant courtroom with their abusers and everyone else. Had separate entryways where they could go in and come out. So there are things that are in place to level the field so that so that victims can get their day in court and not feel victimized or intimidated.
It's hard to believe there was a day where a victim had to sit in the same room with her abuser in a courtroom.
Judge Perry, address, if you will, a comment that Attorney Ashton had made about how a lot of these crimes happen in private, but so many of these crimes have become public, and these crimes are acted out in public, not just of a concern of the general welfare of our society, of our culture, but some of these violent crimes are acted out in public.
Yes, there are a number of cases that are acted out in public, but I have to agree with Mr. Ashton that the vast majority of the cases that we deal with occur in private. They are the ones that make the headlines on the 6 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock news. But there's that subtle thing. You may see someone fussing at someone in a restaurant, and every now and then you may see someone attack someone in public. But the abuse, whether it's physical or psychological, goes on behind closed doors where there are not too many witnesses.
I was given a statistic before we started that to me really spoke volumes. Miami-Dade is twice the population of Central Florida. We have almost the same number of domestic violence cases. I want to open this up to any of you. What is it about us? Is there something about our area, our population, that is lending us to these cases and more of them?
I don't think that's a reflection of the fact that necessarily we have more domestic violence here. I think I think we can take some pride in that because that is a matter of reporting. So I'm not sure that the numbers in Miami reflect the actual occurrence, but rather how often it's reported. So I think this community for a long time, largely, the responsibility of Ms. Wick and Judge Perry have been sort of heralding the importance of this for a long time, and I think that's part of it. I think there are resources here that may not be available in other places, so I think it sort of should be a source of pride that, at least we are getting to people to say, come forward, at least let us know what's going on. So
we sort of take it out of the shadows.
Right.
And Harbor House has done an excellent job in saying, look, if this happens, report it. These are the things you need to do. And when you come out of the shadows, it gets reported. But when you stay within the shadows, it's not reported. And that's not a good thing.
Well, I think, too, we have really unprecedented partnerships here. We've sat down with the prosecution team at the state attorney's office and said, what do you need to prosecute these cases? And then went back and one of their assistant state attorneys, Michelle Latham, helped us develop a training for 911 operators. All the 911 operators in Orange County have now been trained to elicit evidence on that 911 call. And we're working to get more cameras to law enforcement to teach them how to take photographs and evidence. We're all working together, whether it's the courts or the state attorney or law enforcement, trying to connect victims at the scene of the 911 call to increase the support that they get and not wait that 48 hours. And I think that too is something that we just don't see in other places. I talk to a lot of people in the domestic violence field, and they're so jealous of the cooperation that we have here and the passion of the different systems that are working together. I actually got great news last week that family violence threatens a child, which has been the #1 cause of maltreatment as long as I've been here, is now #4, which I think is a huge testament to the partnerships of law enforcement and DCF and State Attorney's Office and the courts in working to make sure that those people are held accountable and that maltreatment drops in this community.
Nancy, one thing that we did do here many years ago, there was a time period where we had about 4 kids killed within a 5-week time period doing visitation with parents. And Judge Blackwell and Judge Evans, we worked on a place called Family Ties, where you could have supervised visitation, but take away all the dangers of that visitation, and that number just bottom out. So we have a group here in Central Florida in the 9th Circuit that will make the process better, and we're not afraid to look at something and retool it and to change it for the best to make sure that everybody's rights, #1, are protected, but the court orders that we enter are also followed and respected.
You're listening to our special live coverage tonight. It's Awareness and Action, Domestic Violence. We're live at the David Moss Automotive Group Performance Center here at News 96.5 with our special panelists that are joining us here tonight for this live broadcast. You can join us with your questions. Text us to 21232. We've also set up a special button on our News 96.5 app. Look for the Harbor House button on our News 96.5 app when you open up that app, and it tells you a number of ways in which you can help out the Harbor House in their mission to eliminate domestic violence by providing safety, shelter, counseling, education, advocacy, and justice. We will continue our special live broadcast coming up next here on News 96.5.
Now, live from the David Moss Automotive Group Performance Studio, here are co-moderators Nancy Alverez from Channel 9 Eyewitness News and Joe Kelley, host of Orlando's Morning News on News 96.5.
This opportunity tonight is presented in partnership with the George C. Young American Inn of Court. Special thanks to Judge Alice Blackwell. We've got a great group of panelists here tonight. If you've missed the first half of the program here tonight, don't worry, we'll get you caught up here in the second half. I do want to introduce our panelists one more time. Former Chief Judge Belvin Perry is joining us here. Also, Florida's 9th Circuit State Attorney Jeff Ashton. Sherri DeWitt, the founder of the DeWitt Law Firm and our News 96.5 legal analyst. The CEO of Harbor House is Carol Wick. And Michelle Dwyer is here, a childhood victim of domestic violence. And of course, my co-host Nancy Alverez, Channel 9 Eyewitness News anchor. I also want to bring up, in the first half of this program, we've talked about, I guess, what is kind of cliche, or maybe these statistics bear this out, with most of the victims being women, most of the predators being men. But there are men who are also victimized by domestic abuse and domestic violence as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we shelter men at our emergency shelter. We serve about 1,000 men a year. We actually have support groups in our outreach programs for men. So absolutely, it does happen. It is a minority of the people that we do serve. I think we shelter about 14 men a year. But it does happen, and I think the stigma is even greater if you're a male victim or a male survivor.
Let's talk a little bit about one thing that are central, really, to all these domestic violence cases: injunctions. Sherri DeWitt with the DeWitt Law Firm. I can't tell you how many stories I've done where I've interviewed a victim or survivor who has said, "How's a piece of paper going to protect me against him?" Injunctions, can they work? Do they work?
They can work, and they can be very powerful tools, Nancy. The trick is that the victim needs to abide by the terms of the injunction. So oftentimes what will happen is that the abuser will call the victim up, and the victim will talk to him on the phone, or they'll meet, and they will themselves violate the terms of the injunction. You can't do that. You have to understand the seriousness of the injunction, and what's really important to know is that if the abuser violates the terms of the injunction, that's a crime. And that's oftentimes a crime that Jeff Ashton's office can prosecute much more easily than the original abuse. So when he was talking about the hopelessness, basically, and the difficulty in prosecuting the underlying abuse crime, there is hope, because it's easier to prosecute a violation of an injunction. So that paper can be very powerful, but you have to know how to use it. It's very important.
Jeff, you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. In addition, a injunction violation actually gives us two tools. because a violation of injunction can be pursued either as a separate criminal charge, which has to be tried in front of a jury with all appropriate, due process that goes with that, but it can also be prosecuted as a civil contempt. In other words, just go to the judge and say, Judge, you gave an order, this person violated it, and you should hold that person in contempt. The potential punishment is somewhat less than the criminal charge, but procedurally, it's a much faster vehicle. So we actually have an assistant state attorney whose job it is to look at those injunction violations and make that decision. Is it better to address this immediately within 30 days or so in front of the judge who can put the individual in jail, for a more limited period of time, or is it better to go through the full discovery process of a criminal trial with the understanding that you could get a greater sentence at the end? And I think that's one of the most important tools we have, because not every case is appropriate for one or the other. And that's been, I think, a really effective thing that we've done.
But it starts with the victim reporting the violation. If the victim doesn't report the violation, there's nothing that anybody can do. So
right. I want to echo what Sherri said, is that when there's an injunction in place, if the victim cannot then start contacting the respondent of the injunction, because then that's in essence inviting a violation. So I think that's very, very important to it.
And Harbor House staff are deputized by the clerk of courts, and you can report those violations to any Harbor House staff. You don't have to go down to the court's office anymore. So we have 13 locations. You can call our hotline and go to any one of those 13 locations to make it much, much easier. And there's online forms now too. But I want to echo what they're saying. If you don't report the violation, nothing's going to happen. Right. And as Judge Perry is very famous for saying, it isn't a bulletproof vest. It is it's something that someone has to respect. And so if your abuser is saying to you, I'm going to kill myself, they're suicidal, they have mental health issues, you need to make sure you've got a safety plan. It is part of a safety plan. It is not a safety plan in and of itself.
And also, just to reiterate, call the police. I mean, yes. Harbor House is a great resource.
Yes, please do that first.
Call the police.
If you have a question for anybody on our panel, there's two ways you can get a hold of us. You can text us at 21232, or you can use the open mic in our News 96.5 app. Just open up the app and click on the open mic button. We do have a question texted to us at 21232. What if you're being cyber stalked? With this new technology we have these days, it leads to all new ways to be stalked and harassed by other people. What if you are cyber stalked? What's the recourse?
Well, cyber stalking, stalking is a crime. It's not always exactly what people think it is. It is a somewhat more complex concept, but it's the same thing. I mean, if you believe you're being stalked, whether in person or through the internet, then call the police and report it, and they'll look into it and see if they can address it. Many things that we would find as offensive conduct aren't necessarily a crime, but you don't know that until you call the police. Call the police, let them know what happened, they'll investigate it, and we'll be able to determine whether it's a crime or not. But doing nothing only invites repeat of the conduct and perhaps worse.
And I want to say too that what we're seeing is that the vast majority of people who are killed are stalked before they're killed. It's almost 80%. So if you're being stalked, don't take that lightly. I know a lot of people, I hear them say, oh, well, they just won't leave me alone. He drives by my house all the time. I have, letters in my mailbox, text messages. I know they're following me on my social media. Don't take that lightly, because it could be an indicator that things are going to get lethal.
Along with don't taking it lightly, document everything.
Yes.
Don't delete things. Document everything if you have the least little inkling, because otherwise it's going to be hard for Jeff's office to do anything. It's going to be hard to prove what's actually been happening to you.
And send it to a friend, because oftentimes what will happen is the person will get a hold of your phone and they'll delete text messages and pictures. So make sure you send those to a friend, especially if you decide you're going to try to get back together and then you change your mind and you've deleted all that information. You want to make sure you've got that. Somebody's storing that.
Or God forbid, the person who's stalking you gets a hold of your cell phone and deletes everything and it's gone. So that's a good idea.
Yeah, voicemails in particular. People tend to like to erase a voicemail that offends them, but then that means it's not around for us to use in trial. So,
Again, if you're just joining us here on News 96.5, you're listening to our special live broadcast. This is Awareness in Action. Domestic violence is our focus here tonight. You can text us your questions at 21232 or use the open mic on our News 96.5 app. When we talked about, and I want to circle back to this word isolation earlier, and we talked about, warning signs, things to look out for. Excuse me, I've been having the same allergies a lot of people have been having this week. But it would make you wonder if there's almost a way to screen people for these kinds of tendencies. Because certainly guys don't all sit around and say, let's start isolating people. Or aggressors don't get together, they don't read a memo, they don't read a book and says, let's start by isolating people. How do we screen for people who might have these kinds of tendencies?
It's a $1 million question. People don't just, these are not people that suddenly become abusers. These are people who are raised this way. They have a certain belief system that allows them to believe that they have the right to in their mind, discipline their partner, but really it's abuse. And so just like you would discipline your child, you would monitor where your child goes, who their friends are, you would discipline them if they broke a rule in the home. If they fail to do chores, you might give them a consequence. That's what they do to their partner. And they believe they have the right to do that. And it just gets worse and worse. So it's, there's not really a mental health issue here. It's not an anger management problem. It's not a substance abuse problem. It is really about someone who just believes that's how they have the right to treat their partner.
And the other great myth is that this only happens to uneducated, poor, women. I mean, we have victims that are well-educated, professional people, and they find themselves all of a sudden in this relationship that has gone in a direction they never expected, and they have the same problems that anybody else would have. It's like, what do I do? What do I do? So.
And actually, I think it's worse when you go sometimes in that higher income, because then, especially with the financial challenges, they tend to not have any access to funds, and then they can't access legal aid and pro bono services because the family income is too high. So they become even more trapped and feel like they have fewer options, and that they'll lose their children. Right. If they walk away with nothing.
Carol, is there a victims hotline for Harbor House?
There is. It is 407-886-2856, and obviously we're there 24 hours a day, and with people who speak multiple languages to help you.
Are there people who are victimized by domestic abuse but don't realize that they're victimized by domestic abuse? Say their friends started to pick up on cues of what they're saying, and they say to them, do you not realize that that's not normal? They're not supposed to treat you like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think when you're in a relationship, again, I think most of the really bad things probably happen behind closed doors, but when you start telling your friends about things and they say, wait a minute, how could you let them treat you like that? It's a very muddled, confused situation to be in, because it's not always bad. It's not always abusive. Sometimes, the person, they describe it as the knight in shining armor, and just this wonderful person that dotes on them and treats them really, really well, and then they become very abusive. So it's difficult sometimes to see through that when you're trapped. And the reason that we use the word survivor is because that person gets into a situation where every day they're trying to read that person's mood, trying to make it so that that person doesn't explode or get angry, or they don't upset that person. And then they're like walking on eggshells. They're surviving that moment, and that becomes the sole focus, is just to continue to survive every day of that relationship. And it's hard to see anything outside of that, because most of your mental energy and emotional energy is tied up in trying to just survive.
That's one of the real benefits of Harbor House, as Carol was saying, when you talk about identifying it as domestic abuse rather than domestic violence. Florida law and Florida statutes can deal with domestic violence. But when you talk about emotional abuse and economic abuse and those kinds of abuses, they may not rise to the level of domestic violence that's protectable by an injunction or by criminal charges. And Harbor House has the facilities and the resources to educate people as to how to deal with that kind of abuse that the legal system may not.
Well, and I know Michelle is one of the best advocates I've ever had the opportunity to work with, and she has certainly had conversations with women who are just been beaten horribly, and they're talking about going back, and she does a great job working with them.
Yes, and we talk about the word isolate, and isolate when you connect that with relating with friends and family, if you isolate it, you don't have friends and family, because by the time the situation happens, they all are gone away. They're tired of you going back. So that's when the abuse kicks in even more, because you're isolated. And isolated looks like moving you around all the time. Maybe you're in that dead-end street. So it's very hard to reach out to individuals when you're isolated.
Michelle, can you speak to that age-old thing that women tell themselves? I can change him.
Yes, and you always think you can change him, and or it's going to get better. Oh, he didn't mean that. You know, this day wasn't as bad as yesterday. So once you're in that relationship for a long period of time, you tend to measure what day was good and what day wasn't, and oh, this is not as bad as it looks.
I think we've been talking for almost an hour now, and maybe people listening to us have been visualizing adults, marriages, boyfriend and girlfriends who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s. How common is abuse among teens now, Carol?
It's tragic that it's becoming more and more common, that we're seeing the rates of teen dating violence really skyrocket, and they're just now starting to do some really good research so that we know what the numbers really look like. The CDC is actually coming in and doing some research here in the state of Florida, working with the school system, the Department of Education, and we're really excited to see those numbers so we can really get a better grasp on that. But when we talk to kids, it's a lot. It's upwards to 1 in 2 are experiencing it, and they are really struggling with what does a healthy relationship look like from the get-go, because they're just bombarded with images and music and the media and video games and everything else that is not about what healthy really looks like. And if you're certainly not getting that at home, then you really have no gauge of what to expect. And so when your boyfriend grabs you around the throat and holds you up against the wall, you say, well, he didn't abuse me because he didn't leave a bruise. Or I hit him first, so therefore I deserved the black eye. And there just becomes this real struggle to try to educate kids. And that's why programs like our primary prevention programs are so critically important, so that the kids know what healthy really looks like.
We have a text message from an emergency room physician. He says, can I contact a Harbor House any time of the night when I tend to get more victims and they don't have a place to go, in the middle of the night?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we are in the process of setting up a new phone system where emergency departments and law enforcement will have a special hotline that will be dedicated just for them. They can call, and everyone that they call, that survivor, as long as they are willing to come in, will be pre-screened and directly admitted into emergency shelter.
On the subject of those calls, talk about the status of Harbor House right now. Overcapacity.
Yeah, we unfortunately we have 132 in our 102-bed shelter. We see this every year at the end of the year. We get past FCAT and moms are ready to flee. We have a lot of children in shelter. I'm not quite sure of the exact number. How many?
72.
72 children.
72 children right now.
In our emergency shelter right now.
I'm sorry, so you're saying there's a season for...
I wouldn't say there's a season. I think there's a time that people feel, people don't want to disrupt their children's education. And so most people think that people flee violent relationships when there's some sort of crisis. And sometimes that's true, but a lot of times it's planned. And they will call the hotline for weeks, and we will plan with them and plot this out so that they can leave safely. And so a lot of times that planning is around the children's education. And they know that they can flee, they can get relocated, and they can do that over the summer and then have their kids settled when school starts in the fall.
Now, some professions, like doctors, like police officers, like caseworkers, they're obligated by law to report incidences that they suspect of being domestic abuse. But what about, other offices, other cubicles, other, accounting firms, or, the hardware store, or whatever it may be? Where's the line between staying out of other people's business and getting involved in other people's business?
I would like to say that if you suspect that your coworker's in an abusive relationship, it is your business, because when that person comes into that workplace with a gun and wants to kill them, they might just kill you too. So it is your business, and you need to make sure that you're talking to that person. And Harbor House works with about really about almost 350 workplaces right now, from international companies, some little bitty small mom and pop shops, really educating them about workplace safety and domestic abuse. So it is definitely your business, and we'll come in and train you so that you know how to respond to those situations.
And one good thing, if they get involved, it makes that victim feel not so isolated, because that victim really wants someone to help. And if they don't help, and if they turn a blind eye to it, then it reinforces that isolation, that nobody's there for me but the abuser.
Isn't it so important, too, to just to be involved? I love when we said, we don't want to be nosy and we don't want to get in other people's business. I did a story not very long ago with a woman, a survivor, who was locked in her bedroom for days, bruised and beaten in her bed. Her husband never took her to the doctor. He took the kids to school, went on with the routine as usual, and no one really asked, hey, where is she? How's she doing? He said she had a cold. Just to get involved and to take that extra step in each other's lives, right? Isn't that key in catching these cases?
Well, and I think that's really important. We go door to door in our It Takes Courage campaign. We partner with law enforcement. We had 725 volunteers this last November. We're doing it again. We also have Preach-In, where we ask faith leaders to preach about what healthy relationships look like first weekend in October. So there's lots of opportunity to get involved and to do something. But even when we go door to door, just coming home and seeing that door hanger, we have close to 100 people seek services within 48 hours just from coming home and seeing a door hanger on their door. So people want that information, they want that help, they want to be connected. It's just critically important that there's somebody that will listen and will say, hey, I'm worried about you.
It wasn't all that long ago that the prevailing view was that's a family matter. What happens behind closed doors has to stay behind closed doors. It's not anybody else's business. We've come a long way since then. Even the laws have changed, and now there's more and more of an obligation on people who see domestic violence to report it, to the tune of the fact that if you don't report it, it can be a crime that you yourself might be later convicted of. So a lot of people do still feel, that sense of shame, that it's a family matter. I don't want to get other people involved, which further increases the isolation. But people need to realize that's not the state anymore.
And family violence threatens a child is child abuse, and it is now a felony in Florida to fail to report child abuse. So if a child is in the home witnessing that abuse, that is a reportable DCF offense, and they need to report that.
Well, and when you talk about children, I can't help but to talk also a little bit about bullying at school, because that is a form of abuse that just gets perpetuated as people grow up, as the children become adults.
Yes, and there's a lot of research that shows that bullies grow up to be batterers.
Michelle, we started with you. I don't want to end without hearing from you again, because I would ask if you could speak directly to anyone who may be listening, to a woman or a man who may be hearing us right now and is afraid to make that move. What do you have to say to that person?
What I have to say, if you're involved with a relationship that includes any type of form of behavior, which includes physical, finance, bullying, verbal, economics, please reach out to Harbor House. Call 407-886-2856. Once again, 407-886-2856. Thank you.
And if you're interested in helping the Harbor House, there are a number of ways you can help. Not the least of which is you can go to news965.com. You can also go to our News 96.5 app. We've created a special button that you can press. It's simply labeled Harbor House. Can we call the same phone number to make donations or to ask about things that you guys might need?
You certainly can, but the administrative number is 407-886-2244. Or you can just email us at admin@harborhousefl.com.
I will tell you that we do have a number of people who have texted questions, and might I suggest to them that one or all of you will stick around until everybody's questions are answered off the air to make sure that we don't leave anybody wanting for information tonight.
Absolutely.
Sure.
A special thanks to our panelist here tonight, former Chief Judge Belvin Perry, who's also an analyst for Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
And for the people.
Florida's Ninth Circuit State Attorney Jeff Ashton, Sherri DeWitt, founder of DeWitt Law Firm, and our News 96.5 legal analyst, Carol Wick, the CEO of Harbor House, Michelle Dwyer, a childhood victim of domestic violence, and of course Nancy Alverez from Channel 9 Eyewitness News for a superb job tonight. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like additional information about Harbor House, you can find it right now at news965.com. Perfect timing.